Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Dream, Declare, Deliver. I'm your host, Chris Carell, and I have the great delight today of having my dear friend Stacy Feiner, Dr. Stacy Feiner, as a guest today. Talking about learning to feel and some of the concepts of emotional intelligence. Stacy's a business psychologist par excellence. She's been working in the field for quite some time. We'll just raise our eyebrows at that and not say how many years and so on, but very successful career working with businesses, with family-run businesses, with complex organizations, and all around the field of psychology and business psychology. So Stace, first of all, thank you for doing this. It's wonderful to have you here. I always love our conversations, and so want to start off by just asking the general question. I contend that we need to learn to feel again. That we've gotten as a society to a place where where we're disassociated from our feelings, where we're numbed out too often, where we don't have a sense of what the role of emotion is and how valuable that is. And so why do we need to do that? Why do we need to talk about learning to feel, in your opinion?
Well, I agree with the things that you're saying, Chris, and I am glad to be here, and I do love the conversations that we have. So I hope our riffing is relevant to your listeners. The first funny thing I would just say is how funny or ironic it is that the most relevant or real thing about us is our emotions, and we are so far removed. We need a lesson on what they are and how to use them. So I think that is it's ironic and funny. We should take stock in just the concept of human beings who feel by their very nature needing a lesson on emotions. So that's
how do we get there? Even maybe it's more important, not so much how did we get to this place, but why is it important? Why do we're evolved with emotions, and I really think that it really dates back to our forebears, way back in prehistory, where we emotions were what we had in common. It was what we drew together with. And so a lot of people, and most of the field of psychology, say that we evolved as emotional beings first, and that was part of our survival system. So
we can go that far back, and we can look at the brain and the frontal lobe and the amygdala, and I'm not a brilliant brain scientist or neuroscientist, but certainly our brain is the machine, or it's the control tower. It happens in our brain. Some of those things can be charted and light up on a screen or a scan, and our mind doesn't. Some things about our mind, our spirit, our emotion, we don't really have a location for them. So I think in some ways, just looking at business today, we like the numbers and the tangible. And we are, the model, the system that we're living in likes the numbers and the tangible, and what is intangible or hard to see or intuitive is discredited. And so I think what happens is we have naturally kind of gravitated away from emotion, or at least thinking about our emotions, and over credited or overestimated the power of thought, when really thinking is the byproduct of emotion, and thoughts are superficial compared to emotion. Yet we seem to like to use thought over emotion.
Well, and you said it yourself, it's like the prefrontal lobe has taken dominance over the rest of the brain, when in fact the rest of the brain still exists and works quite fine. Thank you very much. And in brain science studies, what they notice is not only does the whole brain light up when we're faced with emotional stimuli or things like that, but also the brain stem, the whole spinal column, the heart. And they're
Right.
actually now believing that the heart is as much involved in emoting and thinking and feeling as the brain itself. And so, we're a whole system is what research is now finding. And so we bring that with us wherever we go. And yet, businesses said, leave that in the parking lot. Like, don't bring that crap into work. Don't bring your
Well,
emotions to
but that's
work.
the irony too, Chris, is that those leaders who have said leave the emotion in the parking lot come to work angry. They show up yelling at their employees. They're
Mm-hmm.
impatient, and those are all
Mm-hmm.
emotions.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So, I mean, this notion that emotion is dangerous, or, you know, our leaders, when they are not self-aware, are using a lot of negative emotion.
Yeah.
So emotion is not, we can talk about not using it or leaving it in the parking lot, but what we're really saying is kind of the feminine or the emotional or the nurturing or the vulnerable emotions are not allowed in business, but the dominant, angry, impatient,
Masculinist.
demanding,
Yeah. Right.
masculine
Right.
emotions are.
So
So
are you saying that it is a gender kind of driven thing because business had kind of evolved as a masculine dominated arena for so many years? It's only in the last 20 years that we've really seen women rising in the ranks. There's still a massive glass ceiling, and we still have so much inequity, so that it is kind of male dominated. Do you think that that's part of the denial process of the role of emotions?
I think yes. I think it's complex, and there are lots of origins to where we are today. I would
Yeah, of
say that
course.
there is a system, and the system has a way of justifying itself
Hmm.
by looking at certain statistics, or evaluating certain statistics that justify the system of leadership that or business that we work in. But I think we all suffer, men and women suffer together when we don't have the full expression of
Hmm.
our emotion, and when women are discredited, and men are chided. Women are discredited for their some of our qualities, and men are
Yeah,
chided if they
right,
demonstrate human qualities that don't typically aren't super hyper masculine. So we
right.
all suffer in the system.
Hmm. Hmm. That's I don't know. It's fascinating. So there's two parts of it. There's really the expression of the emotion, but there's also the awareness of, like, what's behind our emotion and what causes that. Emotional intelligence first quadrant is self-awareness. It's really, you go nowhere in emotional intelligence until you first become aware, not of like my persona, not of my resume, the me that I want to project as an image of myself, but being aware of how I operate and what's really going on inside of me and what causes me to do what I do. you know
Yes. Yeah.
so we really got to get into the awareness function and teach people. And
Yeah.
like you said at the beginning, it's really kind of sad that we've gotten to this place where the most fundamental of human functions um is
Are
some
unavailable to us,
are unavailable, and
invisible
we
to
have
us.
to
Yeah.
teach, and we have to
Right.
teach it.
Right.
So.
And I would say, so I would just when thinking about emotions and the value of them and the importance of them, sometimes I think about it as we go from self-awareness
Mm-hmm.
to emotional awareness
Mm-hmm.
to emotional maturity to emotional confidence. So when I coach
Ooh.
business leaders, right,
Yeah.
they are responsible for themselves and 150 other people, or 100,
Mm-hmm.
1,500 other people times four. Though all those people who are employed by that business owner have families of four, let's
Mm-hmm.
just say. So it's
Yeah.
always a multiple of four. And they can't look over their shoulder and say, I wonder who else is going to make sure that my culture is well run, or my
Mm-hmm.
people are well taken care of, or they're productive, or I'm getting the highest profitability because I have a culture that allows people to perform at their highest level. So
Right.
they can't look over their shoulder and expect somebody else to do that. So the conversation first starts with the business owner, and they need more emotional awareness, maturity, and confidence
Hmm.
so that they can be present for the emotional needs of their employees or their stakeholders.
Yeah. Say more about emotional maturity. I love that term.
Well, emotional, so it's self-awareness. First, we have
Right.
to
Yeah.
be self-aware. We need to recognize ourselves in relation to others,
Hmm.
what my self-perception is and how the world sees me as well. Then we move into emotional awareness. So I'm
Hmm.
aware and recognizing that emotions are the feeder of decisions.
Hmm.
Every
Yeah.
decision is based on an emotion.
Right.
And then from there, we go into emotional, did I say maturity?
Maturity.
Emotional
Yeah.
maturity.
Yeah.
And then emotional maturity has to do with is closer to emotional intelligence. And then
Hmm.
emotional confidence is I can be there for the needs of others and I can
Hmm.
find solutions that meet the needs of many,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm a caretaker I'm a steward of this
Yeah.
larger organization. And
And go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
no, you can pipe
Well,
in and I.
what I was, jumping back to was, starting with emotional awareness and self-awareness, not as a state that you can get to, but as a process. What I must become aware of is that I'm constantly evolving as a process, and that everything is not, you know, because I am this fixed entity, I will always, do such and so. That's a logic mind that, that really isn't a human construct. So, becoming self-aware and emotionally aware is really becoming aware of the process that I'm always in, the flow that I'm always in.
Well, that's growth. So as human
Yeah,
beings, we're
right.
always in the process of growth. And
Hmm.
I mean, that's another challenge to the emotional equation is that we often don't recognize our own growth. We also often don't recognize that we have shifted our thinking or adapted or progressed to a new emotional
Hmm.
state. I mean,
Hmm.
when people want to grow, what they're doing is they're growing from one state to a higher state. That's growth.
Right.
So I think it's important to recognize when we are self-aware and we are proactive in our own growth and development, we are moving to higher
Mhm.
order of our emotional, psychological, sociological well-being.
And at the same time, it's a death rebirth type growth. It's letting go of this level so I can get to that level. So what inhibits a lot of people's personal growth, I think, is they don't like the feeling of the death rebirth. They don't like the feelings associated with loss of control of, because like I'm happy at this level here. It works
Mm,
well. I'm doing okay. Thank you very much for sharing. I don't want to have to let go of this in order to go to there. And so
mm,
that perceived pain, and I'll call it a pain, is what inhibits a lot of people's growth, and also their lack of awareness of that process that they're in as an emotional
mm,
beings. They're not aware that it's not a pain, it's actually just an attachment. It's a cognitive attachment that they're having,
mm,
that their ego doesn't want to let go.
mm,
But it's not, that's not an emotion. So it takes emotional awareness to really understand
mm.
that growth process, the
Oh,
what
I
I call death
agree.
rebirth, kind of process that we have in growing. You know,
I
who is it that said, like we only grow when the pain of being here is greater than the pain of going to the next level, right? So, we do more to avoid pain than we do to gain pleasure.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think of when I think of working with athletes that I've had the privilege to work
Hmm.
with at the beginning of COVID, or the beginning of the pandemic, and I got some seemingly random calls from athletes saying that they were in a funk.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was a really painful experience because they are used to waking up every day, maybe dreading their routine, but hungry for it. You know,
Yeah.
this
Right.
this
Yeah.
um and um and so just to riff on that for 1 second, Chris, is when I got started with my first athlete and he called and he said he was in a funk, I was a little bit, curious about what that funk was or what that meant. And I
Hmm.
said, and I gravitated towards something I thought he was aware of is, well, what's a slump? So when we started comparing these words, being in a slump versus being in a funk, he became more confident in the conversation because he could grapple with the idea of a slump.
Yeah.
And then kind of I could be the informant on a funk, and we came to this understanding of words and the imposition of emotions and the opportunity of emotions and the need for emotions and the tension, the relevance of the tension. So all of
Mm.
those things kind of came up in those conversations. So some people are gravitate to this curiosity.
Yeah.
Some people enjoy it. I mean, I've many times said to my clients, this is fun. And they're like, no, Stacy, this is not
It's
fun.
not
It might be rewarding, but it is not
not
fun.
fun. Right. Right.
But
Right.
I
So,
find it fun because I have so
yeah.
much confidence in people's ability to grow and grapple with those
Amen.
things and the
Yeah.
capacity that they have. Yeah.
Yeah. You make a really important distinction there, and well, that is the important function is the distinction between a funk and a slump, and what, I always joke about the fact that I deal with a lot of emotionally binary humans, that their emotions are good and bad, or not so good and not so bad, or kind of good and kind of, like they really only have those two classifications of up and down. And so your athletes, we're lumping everything
Yeah.
together in this funk, and just the ability to name things as distinct from each other, gives them,
Oh, for sure.
an opening to be able to move.
100%. And I think moving is exactly the word. And
Mhm.
sometimes when I work with people, and again, this is still in the realm of emotion, right? And for
Right.
your
Yeah.
listeners, this is sometimes a tool which you kind of spoke to, is when you're trying to solve when you're trying to understand how you feel emotionally.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's good to literally write down the sentence, like, I feel sad and I really want to feel happy, or whatever the
Yeah.
challenge is. And then go to underline the keywords
Yeah.
and go to the thesaurus and replace those words, and then you come up with about 10 new sentences.
Yeah.
So is it sad? Is it lonely? Is it despair? Is it disappointment? Is it just drama? What
Yeah.
are those things? And then it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, depending on how I define my feelings will determine how I solve for them.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why, some of us who work in the field of emotion have come up with these lexicons, these big, like the Wilcox wheel of, all the different emotions that she had on that wheel, or
Right.
Robert Plutchik's flower kind of blossom thing that he had, or my periodic table, I wanted to be able to give people
Words.
associated words that were similar but different or distinct
Right.
from each other, so that they could understand that there was a difference between frustration and anger. That those are kind of in the same territory, but they're really different emotions, and they
The
mean
origins are different.
exactly, their origin is different, their direction, because emotions really tell us. I always love the fact that the word motion is in emotion, that emotions really tell us where to go, what to do, and so their message is different, even though they're similar in feel, in the
Mm.
gut feel of frustration and anger, or whatever we pick, sadness and grief, or any things that are along a similar gradient. um you know their origins are different, their directions are different, where you go with them is different. And so what's really valuable about really the beginning of naming, of having the distinctions between
Mm.
different emotions, is that that we start to understand then, well, what caused this emotion? What's the source of that? And what does that mean then that I should do? What are the actions? Because, sandwiched between our brains, our thoughts and our beliefs and the things that are embedded in our brains as our history, as the context from which we perceive everything, or through which we perceive everything, and the actions, emotions sit right in the middle of that. So we have this, this organ up here that's collected all this information. So new stuff comes in, it says blech, or good, or yum, or yuck, or whatever, and then we take action. We have an emotion, and the emotion and feeling move us in a certain direction. So we are crippled when we don't have that central, that keystone
Right.
in the center.
Right.
That's what,
Huge blind spots.
yeah.
100%. And when we just going back a little bit, because I think there's more to say also about emotional awareness and self-awareness is, Darwin, I think Descartes said, I think, therefore I am.
Right. Yeah.
But I think what's more true is, I emote and therefore I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thought being the word think, and again, I'm not a Darwinian and I'm not an interpreter of his philosophy or such, but I think the notion of thinking is that self-awareness. We can self-observe. We can observe ourselves. And I think once we do that, then it's recognizing that we have a mind, that we often allow our mind to have a mind of its own. But self-awareness allows us to use our mind to direct our thoughts.
Yeah.
And because our mind, our thoughts can often take us down a negative path. They often do. So if our mind pays attention and directs our thoughts and our feelings, pays attention to those things, and directs them in a way that is more useful to us, more positive, but not this blind positivity, but useful to us, so that we can recognize, again, the origins, the outcomes, the allowing the environment to impact us so heavily, recognizing that breathing and being present and coming back into ourselves is a source of power, of our own power. We begin to use more of our senses, and our mind becomes really a piece of very valuable equipment to our well-being.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're speaking into something that's an ancient philosophical premise, really, a Buddhist thought is there's the eye that is the beholder and the eye that it sees. So when you say the sentence, I see myself as this kind of person, there's the person that I see myself as, and then there's the I that sees it. So when Descartes said cogito ergo sum, I see, I think, therefore I am, it's the observer I that he's speaking of. And the am is what the observer is seeing. So when we get the ability to, become observers of ourselves, which is the self-awareness thing you were talking about earlier, it's like when we get the maturity to say, oh, this is not who I am. I am the I that sees. This is just an ego, a little constructed image, that I've made, that, that I believe myself to be. And most people, and a lot of people that I work with, live in that image. They don't live in the I that's the viewer, the seer of themselves. They're not. That's the awareness.
And translating that into the work with business owners or leaders or athletes, I do think the philosophy of it is so important. It's the existential, place that we should go more often. It's, it's where imagination, but practically sometimes leaders are, they, pontificating maybe sometimes is difficult for them, or kind of. So thinking about it in terms of reflection. So there are three kinds of thinking: reflective thinking, critical thinking, and future thinking, or forward thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is one way
Interesting.
to capture what you were saying. So most leaders are critical thinkers. They have to be. That's when
Mm-hmm.
you have 80% of the information, 80% of the information, and you're making decisions based on that 80% of information that you know, and 20% speculative. You
Right.
don't,
Yeah.
you could. Then forward thinking is when you have 50% of the information and 50% of the information you don't know, and you have to fill in the blanks. You have to do some thinking about how do I usually say it? Abstract thinking. You have to look
Yeah.
at these
Yeah.
concepts and fill in the blanks with your
Extrapolate.
best case,
Right. Yeah.
extrapolate
Yeah.
to make good decisions. And a lot
Mhm.
of leaders are terrible in that level, because that's a level of ambiguity. And
Yeah.
ambiguity is the hardest state of mind or emotional state to operate in.
Mm-hmm.
So forward thinking is difficult, but most people think that forward thinking is where innovation comes, but that is not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Forward thinking comes with reflective thinking, when you're able to dissect. So let's say you're watching tape, you're an athlete and you're watching tape. What you're really looking for is not the things that you did or they did. You're looking for the things that you missed. What variables did you miss? What did we
Mm-hmm.
not prepare for? What
Right.
happened in our environment
Mm-hmm.
that we could not have anticipated? And how did we react in those moments when we didn't expect the variable?
Yeah.
And it's in that reflective thinking, that third eye that you talk about, that
Mm-hmm.
self-observer, where we can really, I was going to say master, but it's not really master, where we can really harness and capture the strength of what happens within our own minds, within our own sensations, within our own patterns of behavior, with our desires for the future. That's reflective thinking, is where all of those things come together. So for leaders, really the simplest way to become more self-aware is to do more reflective thinking.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
reflective thinking is so valuable to do out loud with a coach who is witnessing
Mm-hmm.
and listening and adding. So it's very generative. Sometimes when you do reflective thinking alone, it can be a little bit imploding. You can implode. So that's why it's so great to be able to think aloud and do reflective thinking.
Well, and it's really that analytical reflective thinking that allows athletes and leaders to get even more efficiency out of their critical thinking, moving the 80% down to 60%, and out of their forward thinking, moving the 50% down to 40%. So that, when you're working with a superior athlete, or really, top level executive, a high performer, what they are able to do, because they've done the reflective work, because they've done the analytical work, they're able to recognize patterns and constellations of information much more readily in the critical thinking, and then project into the forward thinking. They're able to recognize the context and contextualize it in a way that gets them much faster. If you ever stood at a baseball, home plate, and had a real pitcher, not your friend or your buddy, throw a ball at you, a real pitcher throw a 90-mile-an-hour at you, I start swinging after the catcher has already caught the ball. My practice in critical thinking and forward thinking are not developed at all in that area. So I fan the air, and it's already way too late. That's what, again, an athlete is able to do, that real time, that's so fast, but it's because they've done that. They've looked at the tapes, they've done the analytical thinking, and they now have refined that decision process.
I think it's fascinating that we're talking about this, because part of what we're saying too is, when you do that reflective thinking in the moment, you're much more willing and able to trust your intuition. You don't have to think. I mean, I think Malcolm Gladwell writes about it in terms of choking
thin
versus
slicing. Yeah.
Say it
Yeah,
again.
go ahead. Oh, when he talked about thin slicing, choking versus, yeah.
Well, it's choking versus panicking. I
Yeah.
think it's choking versus panicking.
Uh-huh.
And panicking is when you're being attacked by a shark and you have no place to go. But choking is when you have the facility
Mm-hmm.
to make better decisions,
And you don't.
but you second guess yourself and you go back to the remedial, and you don't trust your instincts, and you don't operate on intuition and instinct. So
So you're
what
calling it
I
intuition and instinct, but where does emotion fit into that? Like let's
that
bring it back, put it back to emotion.
Well, because I think when you are not distracted, I think that is emotion. I think when
Mm.
you trust yourself to operate intuitively, that's an emotional state. That's a
Mm-hmm.
self-aware and self-confident and emotionally focused. I think
Yeah.
that's what that comes from,
Yeah.
is from all
Yeah.
of that practice. And yeah, again, I think when you are in circumstances that are unfamiliar to you, you can draw on your own confidence that you've done these practices, or these rehearsals, or these experiments with yourself, these what
Yeah.
if experiments with yourself.
Right.
It's funny because when I start working with a business owner, and his or her expectation is for, I offer them the opportunity to see their whole ecosystem and to be in control and in charge of their whole ecosystem. And in this ecosystem, there are 20 universal dynamics. So there's a
Yeah.
lot going on. We don't, and they agree that they want to achieve excellence in all aspects of this ecosystem. Who wouldn't? Like, everybody
Mm-hmm.
would want to say yes to
Right.
that.
Right.
So it's an easy thing to say yes to. It just can feel daunting. And so the first phase of this process is, we don't do anything. We just visualize what the end goal is, what all of the steps are towards that end goal, and then we visualize what it will take from ourselves
Mm-hmm.
to go get through, to move through each obstacle, to move through each milestone, to connect the dots, to recalibrate, to course correct, to push other people forward, to move this whole organism forward. Before
Yeah.
we do anything, we think it through.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
visualize the process. I call it conceptualize the process. And the reason that's so important is because as the leader, you need to be confident and aware, self-aware of your own tendencies and your own triggers and your own potential and your own strength. And you need to speculate on the strengths and the weaknesses of others in the environment.
Wow. Yeah. So first off, I have to interject and say, already we've hit our 30-minute limit, and I
Okay.
would love to continue this conversation, because I think what you're hitting on is really vital. And what the question I would have, that we could, continue riffing on if we want to, is, I those kind of leaders who have that maturity, and have done the visualization, they know where they're going, they know what with the component parts of it. But the other critical factor that they bring to the party is they have this, one leader I worked with said he has this spidey sense. He uses his intuition. He's able to listen, not to what people are saying, but to why they say what they're saying. And so he engages with his employees, and it's just masterful. He engages with his employees at their source, which is really that stuff that we were talking about before the emotion comes out. So he's able to work with them to know how they're feeling, and to know what their source is, and move them in a direction that really helps them and helps the business at the same time. And I think that's a brilliant element of leadership. And I would love to talk more about leadership and emotions, and how we use emotions not to manipulate or to direct people or manage people, as the Goldman model would talk about it, but really how to respond effectively, and to motivate internal combustion engines in each of the employees that we work with. Would you be able to come back and talk more, or can
Oh,
we
sure.
continue this conversation or
Yeah, let's
something?
do that,
I,
Chris. I
I'd,
have
I'd love
lots
to.
of ideas for that.
I know it's, I mean, that's why I love talking with you, because we just could
Yeah.
go for 2 hours, I'm sure. So, I
Well,
do
and
want
I also like being thoughtful about, who's listening in
to,
and what would matter to them about what we're saying, because we love the complexity of emotion, and we have experienced the power of it and the value of it and the inspiration that comes from it. But really, we've come into a system right now that we live in. We were born into it, and it it credits a dominant approach, and it discredits a connective approach. And what we've learned is that
yeah,
what we've come to what we have been born into is that they don't coexist. And what we're
right.
saying and what we want the audience to believe is that emotional
It's one.
connectivity
Yeah.
is also exists also for profitability,
Yeah.
for relevance, but in order to, it's not one or the other. And
Yeah, we set them
we
up as at odds with each other. You're either this or that, and this isn't the good thing, and that is the good thing, and it really is, a whole system. It like the human being is both logical and emotional, and physical and spiritual, and all of those things rolled into one. And when we
and
deny any
social.
part of that, and
Mostly we're
yeah,
social.
mostly we're social, absolutely.
Mostly we're
Um,
social. And so our emotions really do need to
mhm,
be useful in developing connection with others. So
absolutely,
I'd
yeah.
love to talk more, Chris.
Okay. Let's do it. We'll set up another one
All right.
and continue. All right.